On the 11th of November, I told my son on the telephone that I had a bad chest and was going to bed early. And then I lay on the couch in my front room in the dark with my shoes on and waited. At 20 past 11, I heard a key go into my side door, and whoever turned it did it slowly, one pin at a time, the way you turn a key when you have thought about how much noise a lock makes. He did not call out. In 36 years, my son has never once come into this house without calling out. He went down the 2 steps into my garage, and he was in there 4 or 5 minutes, and I heard the top drawer of my rolling tool chest come open and go shut, and then I heard him say into his phone, very quietly, "It is in there. Give it until Thursday." My name is Orrin Tessier. I am 71 years old. Before I tell you what was in that drawer and who it had belonged to, tell me in the comments where you are watching from tonight and what the weather is doing where you are. And hit like and subscribe if somebody has ever counted on you being asleep. One honest note before we begin. This story is a work of fiction. The voice you are hearing and the images you are seeing are AI-assisted. Names, places, and events are invented for storytelling. Any resemblance to real people is purely coincidental. But the lessons about family, greed, and quiet strength are very real. Now, let us begin. There is a key on my ring that does not open anything. It is a brass blank, a 5-pin residential blank, and it has one shoulder cut too deep and the rest of it not cut at all, and it would not turn a lock on this earth. Gideon made it in the spring of 1990, standing on an upturned milk crate in front of the duplicator at the shop on Hammond Street, with my hand over his hand on the carriage. He was 9 years old. He got the alignment wrong and dragged the cutter and put a gouge in it, and he was so disgusted with himself that he went and sat in the stockroom. And I went in after him and told him that the first key any of us cuts is garbage and that he should keep it. He said, "You keep it." So I put it on my ring in 1990, and it has been on my ring every day since, through a sold business and a dead wife and 35 years of doors. I ran Tessier Lock and Safe on Hammond Street in Bangor, Maine from 1981 until I sold the business in 2019. 38 years. People think a locksmith opens doors. That is about a tenth of it. What a locksmith actually does is answer a question, and the question is nearly always the same one, which is, did somebody really force this? For 19 of those years, I was the man the Penobscot County Sheriff and later the state police called when they needed that question answered on a burglary, because a picked lock and a lock that somebody scratched up with a screwdriver afterward to look picked are two completely different objects, and there were maybe 4 people in the state who could tell you which one was in front of you. I testified about it 100 and some times. My son has never once been able to describe my job to another person without using the phrase, "fixes doorknobs." Colette died in January of 2022, so this coming winter will be the 4th one without her. 45 years we were married. She kept the books at the shop for 30 of them, and she was better at that than I was at everything. And I want to say plainly that I did not manage the 3 years after her well. I ate standing at the counter. I stopped answering the phone. I let the house get away from me in a way she would have had something to say about. What I am telling you is that when my son started coming around again in April, I was not in a state to ask myself why. He came up from Portland, an hour and 40 minutes, first every other Saturday, and then most Saturdays, and then some weeknights. He is 44. He does commercial real estate, and he is good at it, in the way that people are good at things they do not particularly love. He would come in and hug me at the door and ask about my back, and while I was in the kitchen, he would be moving through the house. Not sneaking, just moving. There is a way a person walks through a house when they are looking at it instead of being in it, and I had been walking through other people's houses professionally for 4 decades, and I knew that walk perfectly well. and I chose not to know it. His wife came about half the time. Margot is 41, and she is a closings attorney in Portland, real estate and title work, and she is very precise. She dresses precisely. She speaks in complete sentences that arrive already edited, and her smile comes about half a second after it should, the way a subtitle arrives just behind the voice. When Gideon was in the room, she was warm enough. When he stepped out, the warmth stepped out with him, and I would catch her looking at my ceilings and my window casings and the crack in the plaster over the stairs, the way a person looks at a building. And I told myself she could not help it, that people in property look at property. Here is what they were actually looking at. When I sold the business in 2019, I sold the business. I did not sell the building. Tessier Lock and Safe sits on the corner of Hammond and Columbia, brick, 2 stories, 1904, and I own it outright and have since 1993. For most of my life, it was worth what a 2-story brick building in a slow downtown is worth, which is not much. Then the waterfront money came, and the block behind me got redeveloped. And in February, an outfit offered me $1.4 million for the corner, and I said no, without thinking about it for even 1 full minute, because it is my building, and because the fellow who leases the ground floor from me is a framer named Dennis, who has 3 kids. I said no in February. Gideon started coming up in April. The first thing I let go by was a conversation in May about a power of attorney. He brought it up at my own kitchen table with a folder. He said it was a durable financial power of attorney, and that it was standard, and that Margot had drafted them for hundreds of clients. And he said, "Dad, if you fall in that garage and crack your head, nobody can pay your taxes or your insurance, and the whole thing unravels." And he was right about that. That is a true and sensible thing that a good son says. I told him I would look at it, and I put it in the drawer under the phone, and I did not sign it. And he asked about it 4 times over the summer, and the 4th time was in August, and something went across his face when I said no, that I had not seen on my son's face before. The second thing I let go by was the spare key. I keep a hook inside the pantry door with the house spare, the garage spare, the shop spare, and 2 others on it, and I have kept them on that hook since 1988. In June, I noticed the garage spare was gone. I turned that pantry out looking for it, and then I decided that I had moved it myself and forgotten, which is the sort of thing a 71-year-old man alone in a house will decide about himself at 11 at night without a shred of evidence. It came back onto the hook about 10 days later. I noticed that, too. I told myself I had missed it the first time. The third thing was Bert LaChance, who ran the print shop across from me on Hammond for 30 years and who is 74 and misses nothing. In September, he called and asked me, in a roundabout way, whether I had my building under contract, because a woman had come into Dennis's shop and introduced herself as representing the ownership and asked about the lease terms and when it came up for renewal. I told Bert nobody represented the ownership. The ownership was me, and I was standing in my kitchen in my socks. Bert was quiet for a second, and then he said, "Orrin, she was a small, dark-haired woman, and she was very polite, and she had a folder." That is when I stopped explaining things to myself. I want to be honest that it took from April to September, and that a man who spent 19 years telling the state police whether a door had really been forced sat in his own kitchen for 5 months explaining away a missing key. Grief does that. It does not make you stupid. It makes you unwilling, which is worse. Because unwilling has the shape of stupid from the outside, and you can defend it to yourself all day long. I did not confront him. I want to be clear about why, because it is the only decision in this whole business I am fully at peace with. I did not know what he was doing. I knew he wanted the building, and I knew he had been in my garage, and I knew a woman with a folder had been in Dennis's shop. And if I had picked up the phone and said any of that out loud to my son, whatever he was building would simply have been rebuilt somewhere I could not see it. So I did the only thing my trade ever taught me, which is that when you do not know what somebody did to a lock, you stop touching the lock and you go and watch the door. On the 10th of November, he called and asked if he could come up Saturday. On the 11th, I called him back and told him I had a chest cold and was going to take something and go to bed at 8, and that he should not bother coming Saturday because I would be poor company. And I heard the shape of the pause on the other end of that line. It was about 2 seconds, and it was not concern. Then he said, "All right, Dad, feel better." And there was a warmth at the edge of his voice that I have heard my son use exactly twice in his life. Both times when he was getting something he wanted and did not want you to notice he had gotten it. I turned off every light in the house at 8. I put my shoes on and I lay down on the couch in the front room under a blanket with my head at the end nearest the hall, because from there I could see the side door and the top of the garage steps. And I lay there for 3 hours and 15 minutes in the dark, listening to the furnace and to a truck downshifting on the interstate a half-mile off. And at 20 past 11, I heard a key go into my side door. He did it slowly. I could hear him doing it slowly. And what went through me was not fear, and it was not even anger. It was a grief so specific it had edges. Because a man who is turning a key slowly has already decided that the person inside is somebody to be gotten past. He did not call out. He went down the 2 steps to the garage, and I heard the concrete under his shoes, and I heard the 3rd drawer of my rolling chest, which sticks, come open and go shut. He was in there about 4 minutes. Then he came back up and stood in my kitchen for a moment, and I heard him say into his phone, in a whisper that I only caught because I had been lying in that dark for 3 hours with nothing else to do, "It is in there. Give it until Thursday." Then he went out the side door and locked it behind him and drove down Grandview and was gone. I waited about 20 minutes. Then I got up and put on the garage light and stood in front of my own tool chest with my hands at my sides, and I did not open it. I went back in the house and got my phone and photographed the outside of that chest from 4 angles first, because I am 71 years old and I have testified enough times to know that the order in which a man does things is the whole case. Then I looked at the drawer lock, and that is where the first thing came apart. That chest has a factory tubular lock on the top drawer that cams down the whole stack, and it has been locked since Colette died because there is nothing in it worth stealing, and locking it was just something to do. Somebody had opened it, and it had not been opened with my key. There were 4 fresh witness marks at the 7, 9, 11, and 1 o'clock positions on the face of the barrel, bright metal in the oxide, the exact print of a 7-pin tubular pick tensioned counterclockwise by somebody who did not know how much torque a cheap cam lock wants. I have taken apart maybe 400 of those. I could have told you the make of the tool. My son did not do that. My son cannot pick a master padlock and never could, so then I opened it. The 3rd drawer down is where I keep hole saws, and sitting on top of them, dead center, was a tobacco tin. Not mine. It was a Prince Albert tin, the old red kind, and it was clean on the outside in a way that a 50-year-old tin in a garage is never clean. I photographed it where it lay. Then I put on a pair of nitrile gloves out of the box on the shelf, because I have picked up other people's evidence before, and I know exactly how much good gloves do you, and exactly how much they do not. And I lifted the lid. There were 3 things in it: a woman's wedding band, yellow gold, narrow, with an engraving inside the shank, a small tortoiseshell hair comb with 2 teeth broken off, and a St. Christopher medal on a broken chain, the little oval kind, worn thin on the face the way they get. I sat down on the step. I knew that ring. Every person in this city over the age of 50 knows that ring, because a photograph of it ran in the Bangor Daily News for the better part of a year in 1995, above a description that I could still recite. Yellow gold, 5 millimeters, engraved inside with the letters R and N and the date, the 2nd of June, 1990. Rosalie Nadeau walked out of a laundromat on Center Street on the 14th of October, 1994, at about 9 in the evening, and nobody ever saw her again. She was 26. She had been married 4 years. Her husband, Ronan, was a Bangor patrolman, and he was on shift that night with 2 other officers who said so. And the case went cold in about 11 months, and it has been cold for 31 years. There is a bench with her name on it by the river. There is a Facebook group. Every few years, somebody digs somewhere, and it is on the news for 2 days. And here is why my son put that tin in my garage instead of in anybody else's. In 1994, Rosalie Nadeau worked the counter at Tessier Lock and Safe. 11 months. She answered the phone and ran the duplicator and did the impressioning that I taught her because she had good hands. She quit in September of that year, and she vanished in October. And in November, 2 detectives came to my shop, and then they came back, and I sat for 4 interviews across 5 months, the last one 4 hours long, in a room at the old station on Court Street. They looked at my truck. They looked at my shop. They looked at the storage unit I rented on Odelin Road. They never charged me with anything because there was nothing. And after a while, they stopped coming. But a town does not stop. For about 6 years, I could tell when somebody in the hardware aisle had just worked out who I was. Colette used to say she could hear it happening. And in 1999, somebody spray-painted one word on my roll-down door on Hammond Street, and I painted over it myself at 5 in the morning before Gideon came in for his summer job. And I never told him what it said. So the plan was very simple, and it was very good. Give it until Thursday. On Thursday, a tip goes in, anonymous or not, and the state police come to a house on Grandview Avenue with a warrant, and they open a tool chest in the garage of a 71-year-old widower who was interviewed 4 times in 1994, and they find the wedding ring of Rosalie Nadeau in a tobacco tin. They do not need to convict me of anything. They do not even need to charge me. They need 11 days. 11 days of that on a television screen, and I am not a man anymore. I am the thing under the headline, and a durable power of attorney and a fast sale of a corner building on Hammond Street becomes something a family does quietly for a man who is going to be in a courtroom for the next 4 years. I sat on that step in my garage for a while. I want to describe what it was like accurately and not make myself sound better than I was. My hands were steady. My chest was not. There is a particular kind of grief that comes when you understand that somebody you made has looked at your whole life, the 4 interviews and the paint on the door and the years of a town half deciding about you, and has seen in all of it not a wound, but a handle. Then I got up, because there is a thing I know about being accused that most people never have to learn, which is that the only real currency in the first 48 hours is who spoke first. In 1994, the detectives came to me, and I answered their questions, and I was innocent, and it took 6 years to shake off. And the reason is that I was the second party in every conversation. Everything I said was a response. This time, I was going to be the one who made the call. So I worked the way I used to work a scene. I photographed everything in sequence with the timestamp on. The chest closed, the chest open, the tubular barrel under the loop light with a machinist's rule beside it so the witness marks had scale. The tin in place, the tin open. Each object separately, front and back, the engraving in the shank of the ring, with the phone about 3 inches off it, which took 11 tries. Then the side door of my garage, both cylinders, inside and out, because there were no marks on those at all, and the absence of marks on a door is a fact just as much as the presence of them, and it says that whoever came in had a key. 41 photographs. It took me a little over an hour. Then I called Bert LaChance at 2:20 in the morning. He picked up on the fifth ring and said, "Somebody better be dead." I told him what was in my garage. Bert did not say anything for about 8 seconds, and then he said, "Orrin, I remember them coming to your shop in '94, and I remember what they painted on your door in '99. And I want you to listen to me now. Do not sit on this until morning." He said the thing I already knew and needed to hear in another man's voice, which was that the only version of the next month I could survive was the one where the state police heard it from me first, and heard it tonight. I called the state police tip line at 3:40 in the morning, and I told the woman who answered exactly 3 things. That I was Orrin Tessier of Grandview Avenue in Bangor. That in the last 5 hours, a person with a key had entered my garage and placed a container in a locked tool chest, and that the contents of that container appeared to include the wedding band described in the Rosalie Nadeau file from 1994, and that I had photographed all of it, had touched none of it with a bare hand, and would not touch it again, and would be sitting in my kitchen with the light on until somebody came. She asked me to repeat the name twice. Then she asked me to stay on the line, and I sat at my own kitchen table at 3:40 in the morning holding a phone, and I could hear her talking to somebody else with her hand not quite over the mouthpiece, and the word she used was Nadeau. And the tone she used was the tone of a young person who has just been handed something that is above her. Detective Imelda Frechette of the Major Crimes Unit knocked on my door at 7:50. She is somewhere in her 40s, and she came alone at first, and she stood in my kitchen and let me talk for 40 minutes without writing much down. And at the end of it, she said, "Mr. Tessier, I have read your interviews from 1994, all 4 of them." And I said, "I know how this looks." And she said, "No, sir, I do not think you do." And she took out her phone and showed me a scan of a report from January of 1995, in which a detective named Lozel had written that the shop owner's cooperation had been complete, and that, in the investigator's opinion, he had no involvement whatsoever, and that the file should reflect it. 30 years I did not know that sentence existed. Then I walked her out to the garage, and I gave her the thing that turned the whole morning, which was the barrel of that tubular lock. I put the loop light on it, and I told her what the 4 bright marks were, and what tool made them, and which direction it had been tensioned. And I told her that I had 11 years of testimony in this state on exactly that question, and she was welcome to pull any of it. And then I told her the part that mattered, which is that I have arthritis in both thumbs, that I have not been able to hold tension on a tubular pick since about 2017, and that my orthopedist in Brewer has said so in writing 3 times. Gideon and Margot arrived at 11:40, which was 3 days before Thursday, and I have thought a great deal about why. I believe he could not stand it. I believe he had been awake since 11:20 the night before, and at some point that morning he needed to see the house and make sure the house looked the way he had left it, the way a man goes back and checks a door he already knows he locked. He came up the walk fast with his coat open, and he was saying, "Dad, whose cars are these?" before he was through the door. And he got about 4 steps into my kitchen before he saw Detective Frechette and the 2 evidence technicians and the open garage door behind them. I watched my son's face. I want to tell you that there was a moment in it where he was still my son. And there was. And it lasted about a second and a half. And then it closed up and went to work. He said, "Officers, what is going on? Is my father all right?" And Margot came in behind him with her coat buttoned, and she said, "My father-in-law has not been himself since his wife died," which is a sentence she had ready before she got out of the car, because nobody produces that sentence in 4 seconds. Frechette was very good. She asked them both to sit down in the front room, and she asked them ordinary questions in an ordinary voice for about 15 minutes. And then she asked Gideon, in the same voice, whether he had been to the house in the past week. And my son said, "No, not since the end of October. We talked on the phone Tuesday, and he was sick." I was standing in the kitchen doorway. I did not say anything. There was nothing to say. There is a camera on the Furlands' garage across the street, which has been there 4 years, pointed at their driveway, and which catches the near lane of Grandview and about 11 feet of my own. Bert had reminded me of it at 2:30 in the morning, and I had told Frechette about it at 8. She already had it by 11. What broke him was not the camera. It was the lock. Because they went out to the garage, and one of the technicians was working on the tool chest, and Gideon said from the doorway, in front of a state police detective, in a perfectly reasonable voice, he said, "Dad, that chest has been locked for years. How did somebody get into it?" And Frechette turned around and looked at him for a long moment, and then she said, "Sir, nobody has told you that anything was inside that chest." He said, "I can explain." She said, "Mr. Tessier, stop. I am going to tell you the rest of what he did. And then I am going to tell you the thing that turned this from a crime into something I still have not finished carrying." Gideon owed a little over $260,000 in 3 places, most of it from a mixed-use development in Westbrook that went sideways in 2023, and he had personally guaranteed a piece of it. And in February, when I turned down $1,400,000 for the corner of Hammond and Columbia, he had already told 2 people that the building was as good as his. Margot drafted the power of attorney in April. When I would not sign it in August, they went from persuasion to removal. But the tin is the part that took my legs out from under me, and I did not learn it from my son. I learned it from Detective Frechette on the 4th of December in a conference room in Bangor. And she told me carefully and slowly, because she already knew what it was going to do to me. They had traced how Gideon came to be in possession of a missing woman's wedding ring, and the answer was that he did not steal it out of an evidence room, and he did not buy it off anybody. He found it in January of 2022 in his mother's sewing box in the week after her funeral, when he and I were cleaning out the sun porch. Colette had had that ring for 28 years. I sat in that room and could not get any air. Because you have to understand what those words did to a stretch of my life. There was a thing between Colette and me that we never once named in 45 years. And it was this. In 1995, when it was in the paper every week, my wife went quiet on the subject of Rosalie Nadeau. Not angry. Quiet. She would leave the room when it came on the news. Twice I tried to talk to her about the interviews I was sitting through, and both times she said something short and got up. And in the back of my mind, in a place I am ashamed of, I let a thought live for 30 years. And the thought was that my wife had wondered about me and Rosalie and had decided not to ask, and that I was married to a woman who had chosen not to know. I never said it. I carried it. It sat under everything. Frechette found Rosalie Nadeau in 11 days, alive, 68 years old, in a town outside Ottumwa, Iowa, under a name she has had since 1994. She came to Bangor in February. She sat across a table from me in a room at the State Police Barracks in Bangor with her hands around a cup, and she told me what my wife did. In the summer of 1994, Rosalie came to work at my shop 3 times with makeup on her jaw, and I did not see it, because I am a man, and because I was 40, and because I was thinking about a job at the courthouse. Colette saw it in about a week. Colette, who came in Thursdays to do the books, took that girl out to the alley behind Hammond Street and asked her a direct question and got a direct answer. And then my wife spent from July to October getting her out. She did it entirely alone. She saved $430 out of the household in cash over 3 months. She got a name and a number from a shelter in Portland. On the 14th of October, 1994, Colette Tessier told me she was driving to Portland to see her sister. And she drove Rosalie Nadeau down and put her on a bus at 8:40 in the evening. And Rosalie took off her wedding ring in the car in that parking lot because she did not want to carry it another mile. And she left it on the seat. And she left the hair comb and the St. Christopher too, because they had all been his mother's. And she wanted nothing of that family on her body. And Colette drove home to Bangor with 3 objects in her coat pocket and never told me. Not in '94, not in '95 when the detectives were coming to my shop, not in 1999 when somebody painted a word on my door, not in 2022 when she was dying. Rosalie asked me if I understood why, and I said no, and she said, "Orrin, you were going to sit in a room with the Bangor police." Her husband was the Bangor police. Colette told me that if you knew, you would have to either lie to them, which you cannot do, or tell them, which would have put me in a hole in the ground in about a week. She said the only way to keep you both alive was for you to be exactly as confused as you looked. My wife let a town half believe her husband did something to a girl for 31 years, because the alternative was that the girl died. And she let me carry my own small, ugly private suspicion of her rather than hand me a thing I could not hold. I have had a year to sit with that, and I am still not at the bottom of it. It is the single largest thing anybody has ever done for me, and she did it by giving me nothing at all. And she is not here to be thanked, and I do not think she would have wanted to be. Ronan Nadeau retired from the Bangor department in 2017. Rosalie gave a statement in March, 31 years late, and there are limits on what the law can do with most of it. And the assault charges he will actually stand for are 2 counts from '93 and '94 that survived because of a hospital record in Brewer that Colette had told her to make sure existed. He lost his pension. He is 63, and there is a bench by the river with the name of a woman he did not kill on it. And everybody in this town now knows exactly why she had to leave, and he has to live here in it. And I have decided that is enough for me, Gideon pleaded in June. Falsifying physical evidence, burglary, attempted exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and conspiracy. And he took 9 years, and Margot took 4 and surrendered her license. He wrote to me in August. I read it. It is 4 pages, and about 2 of them are true. He has not once in any of it written the words Rosalie Nadeau. And I do not think he has ever, even now, spent 1 minute thinking about the fact that the object he chose as a weapon was a living woman's wedding ring, and that the reason it was in his mother's sewing box is that his mother spent the summer of 1994 saving somebody's life. I have not written back. I am not saying I never will. I am 71. And I am not going to make promises about that far out. I did not sell the building. Dennis the framer is still on the ground floor, and his lease renewed in April at the same number. Rosalie and I talk on the telephone about every 3rd Sunday, and she is a difficult woman with a very dry sense of humor, and I understand entirely why my wife liked her. In September, the city put a second plaque on the bench by the river, and it does not have Colette's name on it, because Rosalie asked me first, and I said no. Colette would have hated it. What Colette did was in a car in a parking lot in Portland at 8:40 at night with nobody watching, and putting a brass plate on it would have been the opposite of the thing itself. Last month, I took the brass blank off my keyring. I did not throw it out. I want to be plain that I did not throw it out, and that I am not going to. I drove down to Hammond Street and went into the shop that used to be mine and asked the young fellow who runs it now if he still keeps the orphan tray, which is the coffee can under the counter where a locksmith puts keys that nobody claimed and that fit nothing anybody can name. He said he did. So I dropped it in, and it made the sound those make, and I said thank you and bought a can of graphite I did not need and drove home. This is a work of fiction, and the voice you have been listening to is not a living man. But the lesson under it is as real as brass and a cold morning. I answered one question for a living for 38 years, and the question was, did somebody really force this door? And the trade taught me a thing I did not understand until I was 71, which is that the most useful evidence is nearly always the mark that should be there and is not. No scratches on the outside cylinder means he had a key. Silence from a woman who talks about everything means she is carrying something she has decided you cannot hold. So look at the absences. Ask who had a key. And when somebody hands you the ugliest possible reading of a person you loved, put it down and go and look for what is not there. Because I carried a small, mean thought about my wife for 30 years, and it was the only thing in my whole life I never bothered to check. My name is Orrin Tessier, and they buried the wrong man.